Have you ever had your life turned upside down in a single weekend? You won't believe what happened to me while I was away on a routine business trip. My own house, my sanctuary, was taken over by a woman named Karen who rented it out to strangers and even threatened my life. Strap yourself in for a wild tale of shocking betrayals, outrageous demands, and mind-bending twists. Read on to find out how I faced down the most unhinged scheme imaginable. And don't forget to stick around until the end for valuable tips on safeguarding your future. It all started quietly enough. I was scheduled to attend a corporate leadership seminar in Phoenix for 3 days. Just 3 days. I'm a mid-level executive at a manufacturing firm, a job that might sound dull to some, but it has afforded me a decent life in the suburbs. At 57, I enjoy the laid-back aspects of my routine. A tidy lawn, a well-maintained deck for barbecues, and the occasional game of golf with my neighbors. The flight out was smooth. The conference was typical. PowerPoint presentations, free pins, awkward networking sessions. Nothing seemed amiss until I stepped off the return flight late Sunday evening and drove back to my house on Willow Bend Road. Picture this, pulling into your driveway to see strangers hauling suitcases across your front lawn. Dazed, you double-checked the house number. Yes, that's definitely my place. I hopped out of my car, politely introduced myself, and asked what exactly they thought they were doing. Two middle-aged women responded that they had booked a quaint suburban vacation rental online. They seemed just as perplexed as I was. They claimed to have dealt directly with the owner, a woman named Karen, who provided them with keys and all the details. At first, I thought it had to be some bizarre mix-up. Maybe a scammer had posted my property without my knowledge, and these poor ladies were duped. But then I heard footsteps clicking on a driveway behind me. In a moment I won't forget, Karen strutted around from the backyard. She had a confident, almost smug grin, and she wore business casual attire, like someone who had just closed a big real estate deal. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, as though she owned the place. "I live here," I said, stunned. "Who on earth are you?" She introduced herself as Karen Bergstrom, the temporary property manager. She never broke eye contact while casually flipping through a folder of documents. "Let me tell you, it's disorienting to stand on your own porch and have someone calmly explain that they've turned her home into a short-term rental." She insisted she had proper authorization. She'd even reprogrammed my digital lock. That explained how those guests had come and gone with such confidence. "Look, I'm sure this is a misunderstanding," I started, forcing my voice to remain calm though my heart was racing. I asked to see whatever paperwork she had. Maybe it was forgery or stolen documents. If she was forging my signature, I expected it to look sloppy. Yet she whipped out a series of photocopied forms, leases, special documents from the county, even what looked like a notarized deed. One by one, these papers named her as the rightful occupant, complete with a signature that looked disturbingly like mine. I was so flabbergasted I nearly lost my composure. I demanded to enter my own house. She flashed a polite yet icy smile and told me that I was trespassing on private property. My property, mind you. I threatened to call the police, but Karen calmly told me I was making a grave mistake. She said I should really think things through, because I know how to play hardball in this town. At that moment, the two out-of-town guests grew visibly uncomfortable. One of them quietly approached me and asked if we could still stay the night until they sorted things out in the morning. Stay the night? In my own house, effectively as paying guests to someone else? This was insane. But they were so earnest, and I felt sorry for their predicament. I told them I had no intention of kicking them out, especially if they'd paid for a legitimate stay. At that, Karen shot me a glare. She had no interest in conciliatory gestures or polite negotiations. She insisted the women pay the remainder of their rental fee on the spot, or else she'd call the sheriff to have them removed. My mind reeled. How did this happen in the span of just 3 days? I began to question my memory. Had I signed any random documents recently? Did I pass along too much information somehow? As the evening wore on, tension escalated. The so-called guests holed up in the guest bedroom, obviously unsettled by the confrontation. Karen hung around in the kitchen, my kitchen, typing furiously on her phone. I retreated to my garage and made a frantic call to my friend Barry, an old high school buddy who worked as a real estate lawyer. I nearly shouted into the phone, describing the situation in a breathless rant. Barry told me to stay put and not do anything rash. He'd call the county clerk first thing in the morning. At that moment, though, I started to feel an unsettling vibe. Karen peeked into the garage, phone in hand, and told me to turn in for the night if I knew what was good for me. The casual threat in her voice sent a chill down my spine. I carefully locked the garage door from the inside and slumped against it, my mind spinning in a whirlwind of confusion, anger, and fear. My own home felt more like a hostage scene than a place of comfort. And it was only day one. I barely slept that first night. Every noise in the hallway made me jump, whether it was Karen walking around or the guests rummaging in the fridge for a midnight snack. By sunrise, I felt exhausted and strangely disoriented, like the star of a day at a cheap motel. I half expected to see the mountain view from Phoenix through the window, but instead I saw my own backyard with brand new footprints across the dew-drenched lawn. The first thing I did after forcing down a cup of black coffee was call the local police department. Explaining the situation over the phone was uncomfortable. The officer on the other end seemed skeptical that it was even possible for someone to steal a house. They asked if I had signed anything unusual. I repeated that I had not, that I was the rightful homeowner, that something was very wrong. The dispatcher told me an officer would swing by as soon as they could, but gave no specific ETA. By mid-morning, Barry, my real estate lawyer friend, stormed into my driveway, tie askew, carrying a bulging briefcase. His first glimpse of Karen was from the front porch, a woman in her mid-40s, hair neatly pinned, wearing an expression that screamed, "I have the upper hand here." Barry tried to strike up a civil conversation, but Karen simply gestured to her folder of mysterious documents. She pointed to a line on the deed that bore my signature. Barry examined the signature, then frowned. He pulled out a magnifying glass, reminiscent of something out of an old detective show. "It's uncanny," Barry whispered to me. "It's your signature, but it not." While Barry continued to scrutinize the papers, a sheriff's cruiser finally rolled up, lights flashing. A short, stocky deputy got out. His name tag read Riggs. He nodded politely, then asked us to explain. At first, it sounded like a typical squabble. Karen insisted she was the owner because the paperwork said so, while I insisted the house was mine because I purchased it nearly 20 years ago. Deputy Riggs didn't appear fully prepared for the magnitude of this mess. Eventually, he radioed back to his station for guidance, stepping away from the porch. Meanwhile, Karen clasped her hands in front of her. "We can settle this peacefully," she said, her voice as sweet as honey. "No need for hysterics. If you can show me a legitimate purchase record that invalidates my deed, I'll gladly step aside." "Oh, you'll step aside, will you?" I retorted, because that's typically how extortion works. She didn't flinch. Instead, she calmly pulled out her phone and started recording me, presumably to show me as the belligerent troublemaker. I tried to remain calm, but my anger was simmering just beneath the surface. Barry had already placed calls to the county registrar's office, but apparently the system was showing Karen's name on an electronic record. Someone had gone to great lengths to falsify everything in a scarily short time frame. Deputy Riggs returned from his cruiser. He admitted that this was beyond a simple dispute and told us that to forcibly remove Karen, I need a court order. Because the documentation appeared legal, Riggs couldn't just drag her out. To top it off, Karen threatened a restraining order if I kept harassing her. The deputy gave me a sympathetic look, but insisted that I'd have to handle most of this through legal channels. A part of me wanted to scream at the absurdity, but I held back. I knew losing my temper would only complicate matters. By noon, a hush fell over the house. The two guests, still oblivious to half of what was going on, hurriedly packed up and left after finishing their rental term. Before driving off, one of them mumbled something about leaving a negative review. I watched them go with a mix of relief and surreal wonder at the bizarre situation. Barry and I retreated to the back deck, sinking into the patio chairs for a hurried strategy session. How could anyone pull this off in just 3 days? I asked, voice hoarse. Barry pursed his lips. It might have been in the works for a while. Maybe Karen has your personal details. Think about anything suspicious, data breaches, social media oversharing, or old acquaintances you didn't trust? We brainstormed every possible angle. Meanwhile, Karen was inside, presumably congratulating herself on how easily she'd manipulated the system. That's when I received a text message from an unknown number. You try anything, and I'll make sure you lose more than just your house. My stomach dropped. The direct threat made it painfully clear that this wasn't merely about forging documents for quick cash. She wanted power, leverage, over me. The rest of that day was a blur of phone calls. Barry called the bank, the county offices, even a friend at the district attorney's office, explaining the urgency. He strongly suggested I find somewhere else to sleep for the night. When the sun dipped below the horizon, I found myself standing on my own front lawn again, gazing at the lit windows of what used to be my cozy living room. A sliver of me expected to see Karen's silhouette in the window, gloating in triumph. Despite my better judgment, I decided to stay in a motel a few miles away. Before leaving, I placed a security camera by my garage door, hidden among the shrubs. I wanted evidence if Karen tried anything else, like moving out furniture or storing suspicious items. Then, as I pulled out of the driveway, I glanced at the rearview mirror. There she was, standing on the porch, arms crossed, head tilted slightly to one side. The message was clear. She was in control, not me. I drove off with a churning sense of helplessness, but deep down, a resilient spark pushed me forward. I might be forced out of my own home, but I wasn't going to let her keep it. This was still my property, my life, and I was determined to fight back with everything I had. I spent the next few days in a whirlwind of legal drama. Barry's contact at the district attorney's office acknowledged that something fishy was going on, but warned that such fraud cases take time, sometimes months, to untangle. Meanwhile, I was stuck watching from afar as Karen happily occupied my house. Through the security camera feed on my phone, I saw glimpses of her sipping coffee in my kitchen, rearranging my living room furniture, and even redecorating my front porch with potted plants that were definitely not my style. If it weren't so infuriating, it might have been funny. Anger aside, I was increasingly worried for my personal safety. The text message threatened more than just financial ruin. It hinted that Karen wouldn't hesitate to harm me if I pressed too hard. Yet I refused to cower. I spent hours rummaging through old paperwork, scouring for receipts, property tax documents, anything that proved my ownership beyond a shadow of a doubt. But forging a signature is one thing. Forging an entire chain of property records is another. My official mortgage was still in my name, but Karen's updated deed seemed to overshadow that in the local system. I felt trapped in a bureaucratic nightmare, the kind you'd read about in a tabloid, except it was my life. Late one evening, I took a call from an old friend, Martina, who used to dabble in private investigations. She'd heard the bizarre rumors from a mutual acquaintance and wanted details. She had a knack for sniffing out hidden truths and offered her help free of charge. Within a day, she discovered Karen had a string of civil suits in other counties. She'd never been convicted of anything, but there were allegations of rental fraud, identity theft, and forging financial documents. The pattern was clear. Karen preyed on unsuspecting homeowners, weaving elaborate cons to claim partial or full ownership. It's a new spin on an old hustle, Martina explained. She's basically a professional at faking official records. Armed with that information, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Barry arranged a meeting at his office with a county official who oversaw property records. I sat in a cramped conference room with fluorescent lights humming overhead. The official, Mr. Tooley, was a gentleman probably in his late 60s, sporting thick glasses and a tie that had seen better days. He listened politely, nodding at intervals. But as he scanned the documents Karen had filed, he rubbed his temples. "It's unusual," Mr. Tooley mumbled. "These are the correct seals, correct stamps, but they're placed in a suspicious sequence. It's like whoever did this got everything right, but not necessarily in the right order." I half joked, like forging a Picasso painting but using the wrong brand of paint. He cracked a sympathetic smile. "Yes, precisely. That might give us grounds to challenge the validity. We need an official investigation, though." As we hammered out next steps, a young clerk burst into the conference room, eyes wide. She whispered something to Mr. Tooley, who then turned to me. "Sir, there's a woman in the lobby asking to see you. She says it's urgent." I had a sinking feeling it couldn't be anyone but Karen. Sure enough, Karen stood in the lobby, arms folded, scanning the environment with hawk-like intensity. The moment she spotted me, she strode forward, face taut with anger. "You're interfering with my legitimate business," she hissed. "I've spoken to my attorney, and if you think you can sabotage my reputation, you've got another thing coming." Before I could respond, Barry interjected, stepping between us to keep the peace. "Karen, you shouldn't be here. This matter will be settled in court." Karen snapped her gaze to Barry, eyes flashing. "No court in the world will side with a man who can't prove he didn't sell his house. I have the deed. I have everything I need." The tension in the room was thicker than blackstrap molasses. Mr. Tooley looked visibly uncomfortable, but as a county official, he had to remain neutral, at least in public. Then Karen delivered a blow that left me reeling. "I've already got new renters lined up to move in this weekend." She smirked as though challenging me to do something about it. I retreated to the conference room, adrenaline coursing through my veins. Barry followed, shutting the door behind us. "We'll need an emergency injunction to stop her from renting the place out," he said calmly, though I could tell he was equally rattled. "How soon can we get that?" I asked. Barry grimaced. "We'll try for tomorrow, but it depends on the judge's schedule." That night, I sat in my motel room, paralyzed by a flood of emotions: fear, anger, uncertainty. I turned on the local news for background noise. The anchor was reporting a surge in housing scams. Ironically enough, in my over 50 circle of friends, we'd often joked about how complicated life can get, especially with new technology. But this was no laughing matter. It was a terrifying reminder that unscrupulous people can exploit even the smallest gaps in the system. I checked my phone, a single notification from the security camera. There was Karen on the porch, shining a flashlight on the shrub where I'd hidden the camera. A wave of panic hit me. If she found it, she'd know I was recording her every move. Then, suddenly, the feed went black. She'd either smashed it or disabled it. My heart hammered in my chest. Now I had no eyes on my property at all. At that moment, I realized the fight was about to get a lot tougher. Karen's boldness was escalating. If she was comfortable confronting me in a county office and destroying security devices, what else could she do? Was I safe, even at the motel? The dread was suffocating, but I clung to the resolve that had guided me for decades. You fight for what's yours, especially the home you've built and nurtured. I had one final phone call with Barry before turning in for the night. He was working with Martina, drafting urgent motions, collecting evidence. Although the uncertainty weighed heavily on my mind, I felt a spark of hope. I wasn't in this alone anymore. Yes, Karen had resources and cunning, but I had loyal friends and the truth on my side. I drifted off to a restless sleep, determined that tomorrow would bring the first real step toward reclaiming my life. I woke before sunrise, a cocktail of anxiety and adrenaline propelling me out of bed. By the time I reached Barry's office downtown, I could smell the fresh coffee in the lobby. It felt like preparing for a court battle in some Hollywood movie, minus the glamour. We had copies of every legitimate deed, mortgage payment record, tax receipt, everything. Martina even managed to dig up a notarized affidavit from the original seller 20 years ago, vouching that the house was sold to me and me alone. At 9 a.m., we appeared before a judge in a cramped courtroom reminiscent of a small-town drama. The furniture was worn, the sound system crackly, but the stakes couldn't have been higher. I'd barely settled in when I heard the clack of Karen's high heels echo down the corridor. She arrived with a lawyer I'd never seen before, a man who looked half her age and wore a suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. They strolled in, exuding confidence, or perhaps arrogance. Barry presented our motion for an immediate injunction, explaining the urgent need to halt Karen's illegal occupation. The judge, an elderly woman with kind eyes but a stern demeanor, flipped through the stack of papers. "Ms. Bergstrom, do you have any evidence to refute these claims?" she asked. Karen's lawyer stepped forward, referencing the contested deed in a series of email chains that allegedly showed me agreeing to sell the property. My blood boiled. Emails? I'd never corresponded with Karen, let alone agreed to anything of the sort. Barry pointed out the suspicious timing and the fact that the domain used in those emails was brand new, created just a month prior. It was a digital trail of breadcrumbs that Karen had manufactured, likely forging entire conversations. The judge's eyes narrowed. Things took a dramatic turn when Martina approached Barry and whispered something in his ear. Barry asked permission to submit new evidence, a sworn statement from a forensic document examiner who concluded my signature was expertly forged. The judge scanned the statement, lips pursed. That's when Karen lost her composure. She stood up, ignoring her own lawyer's attempt to restrain her, and shouted, "This is all a setup. He's just trying to ruin my livelihood." The judge calmly banged her gavel, requesting order. As Karen's lawyer tried to do damage control, the tide in the room shifted. The judge asked the bailiff to escort Karen into the hallway for a moment to collect herself. The rest of us stared in a tense silence. When the session resumed, Karen was visibly upset, but her outburst had revealed a glimmer of desperation. The judge decided there was enough evidence to warrant a temporary restraining order against Karen and her associates, preventing them from renting or occupying the property until the matter was fully resolved. A wave of relief rushed over me. At least I wouldn't be locked out of my own house anymore. But the final verdict still loomed. Upon exiting the courtroom, Karen's lawyer tried to do some last-minute negotiations. "My client is prepared to concede partial occupancy in exchange for a settlement," he said. Barry scoffed. "A settlement for what?" "She forged documents and threatened my client." Karen glared at me one last time before storming out in a swirl of tension. I headed straight to the police station to file a formal complaint, brandishing the judge's restraining order. The authorities finally took decisive action, sending 2 officers to meet me at the house. My heart pounded as I turned the key in my own front door. The place felt both familiar and alien, with Karen's personal touches scattered around. The new potted plants on the porch, a half-finished jigsaw puzzle on the coffee table, even a fresh doormat that read "Home Sweet Home." The audacity was unreal. One officer noticed a folder sitting on the kitchen counter. He thumbed through it, whistling softly. Inside were scribbled notes, addresses, phone numbers. It was Karen's logistical blueprint. Names of unsuspecting families, potential future clients, and references to other properties in the area. It was the tip of an iceberg that hinted Karen had orchestrated a small empire of fraudulent rentals. The officer carefully bagged the folder as evidence. The next 24 hours were a whirlwind of police interviews, statements to local media, and changing all the locks. Although the legal resolution might still take time, Karen was effectively barred from setting foot on my property. The district attorney's office was now considering criminal charges for fraud and threats. Late that evening, I found myself alone in the living room, exhausted but strangely at peace, sipping a cup of chamomile tea. My home was quiet again, save for the faint hum of the fridge. I walked out to the backyard, leaning against the old oak tree that's been here since I bought the house. The night sky was clear, full of stars, something I used to admire almost nightly but had taken for granted in recent months. A wave of gratitude washed over me. Despite the madness, I still had my life, my friends, and my property. Karen might have tried to destroy my sense of security, but in the end, truth and determination prevailed. I won't pretend it was all sunshine and roses after that day. Legal battles are often slow and grueling. Karen's case dragged on, with her pulling every trick to delay hearings. But armed with the restraining order and a growing stack of evidence, I felt confident justice would eventually be served. Rumor had it she skipped town when things got too hot, and the authorities started digging into her financial past. Whether or not they ever caught up to her, I still don't know for sure. But I do know this: my house is mine, and no amount of cons or forged signatures will change that. As I tidied up the kitchen that final evening of the ordeal, I couldn't help but smile. The place was a bit emptier, some of my belongings were missing or trashed, and the new doormat was an unwelcome souvenir from a bizarre chapter of my life. Still, it felt more like home than it had in a long time. Sometimes it takes almost losing something precious to realize just how deeply you value it. And if there's one thing I learned, it's that even in your 50s, life can surprise you with unexpected challenges. You just have to be ready to stand your ground and fight back. Thank you for sticking with me through this roller coaster journey. If this story taught you anything, let it be this: vigilance is key. Always protect yourself and your property from scams, no matter your age or circumstance. Be proactive. Double-check official documents. Set up alerts on your county's website for property changes, and never assume fraud can't happen to you. Ready to secure your future? Start by reviewing your property records and talking with a trusted lawyer or financial advisor today. Stay safe, stay smart, and never back down from what's rightfully yours.